Now, in regards to that, I want to talk a little bit today about finding character. Even after all those 20 years of working to hone my craft, I didn't know everything. I still don't know everything. And what I wish I knew earlier, and that's what I want to talk about today, is finding the core of a character. Much like Christopher Nolan for the first couple of years, especially in comics, I consider myself largely self-taught. I then later went on to read a lot of books about craft and integrate that into my work. But I learned mostly from reading, not just reading comics, but reading screenplays, reading novels, and I absorbed what was most exciting to me about those works. The issue there is that I was, for a long time, thinking largely about, oh, this will be a cool moment. I was building stories with imagery in my head first. I was building stories with set pieces, thinking like an action movie director first. And I think that especially for a book like Midnighter, that worked because he was someone living by action hero rules. But what I soon learned is that that isn't necessarily something that works for everyone. To tell an effective story, you have to find the core of a character so that you're not just telling a fun story, you're telling a story that says something about your lead, and you're telling a story that is best starred in by that character. A story that would be lesser if you put someone else in, that would be less resonant if someone else was the star of it. If you can just Mad Lib in any hero into your story, you haven't really necessarily done the work to understand who that character is and how to challenge them. And that goes for both your plot and also your supporting cast. Once you know the core of who someone is, or you decide in your view what the core of a character is, because there is no empirical answer for the most part, you can then build outwards with a supporting cast that challenges that concept or those themes. And of course, you can then build a plot even further around that to further challenge that. A couple of good examples. Let's talk about Batman, for example. Folks have a lot of different ideas what he means or what he stands for, and there's no right or wrong. For today, we'll talk about two prevailing theories. Some folks would say that Batman is about justice. Some would say that he's about obsession. And when you think about those two concepts, depending on which one you would subscribe to, predominantly, because obviously he's not all about one thing or another. You're just thinking about his core. You're thinking about his main theme. Well, the types of stories you're going to tell with him are very, very different. The types of people you want to surround him with to either affirm those concepts or challenge those concepts are going to be very, very different. If you think he's about obsession, your stories are going to be built around your opinions about obsession. If you think he's about justice, your stories are going to be built around your opinions about justice. That seems obvious, of course, when I say it out loud, but it's something that I think a lot of folks miss when they first come in, and it's something that I wish I had known earlier because, yes, I was a fan and I just wanted to tell cool stories. But there's a difference between a story starring Batman where he just does cool things and a story that really talks about what makes Batman unique, if we want to stick on this subject. A good story has villains, supporting cast, and, of course, a plot that takes a core piece of a character and challenges it. We can unpack, for example, I'll stick with Batman because he does have such a strong supporting cast, a strong rogues gallery. If you think Batman is about obsession, that is a concept that, for the most part, is thought of as at least somewhat pejorative. And so you want to pick apart the things that are good about that, and then you want to examine how it can go wrong. And you can do that in many ways. In the case of Bruce, some of his iconic stories, it's often that he is so single-minded and so self-confident that it becomes a vulnerability for him when he assumes his mastery of a given topic. Take, for example, Gotham City. Thinking about the iconic Court of the Owls story and the whole concept of the Court of the Owls. Every one of Batman's villains, for the most part, challenges something core about him. The most basic being, order and chaos. He stands for order. He is single-mindedly obsessed with that concept to the point where someone like the Joker is uniquely and especially infuriating to someone who is as absolute as him. In the Joker, you see ultimate chaos. In Batman, you see ultimate order, or the striving for that concept. And I think that's why characters like Joker endure so long as his villains. But how do you create something new? Let's get back to the Court of the Owls. This was a story about Batman's obsession with his myth. He thinks that he is the grand myth of Gotham. He is the urban legend. There's nothing bigger than Batman in Gotham's lore. How could there be? Look at everything he's done to this city. Look at everything he's brought to the city and how he affects its people. This is why I think of modern villains, the Owls and the Court of Owls as a whole have persevered now for almost 10 years. Actually, it's 2021, so over 10 years, because they challenge something new about Batman. Batman is overcome with this obsession in regards to his myth. And here you have the Court of Owls, someone who says, well, you think you're big, but we're this much bigger. It's almost a variation of the concept that you had in The Black Glove. I think about when Jezebel Jet says, you're this rich, Bruce, but I can't even reach high enough. That's how rich we are. And in a way, the way that the Black Hand challenges, the Black Glove, challenges Bruce Wayne's wealth, the Court of the Owls similarly challenges Batman's myth. Well, Bruce, you're nebulously 30 to 40 years old, and you think that some myth and someone couldn't be bigger in Gotham's history and have more control over its lore and its energy than you. But here's the Court of Owls, who have been weaving themselves generation after generation into the foundation of Gotham's history. And you think you're big, Batman? Well, you're actually quite small compared to us. Now, for someone like Bruce, especially if he's about obsession and he fixates on these parts of his myth and the persona of Batman, these characters challenging him feels even bigger. It unnerves him in a way that would almost only happen with him versus, say, someone like Daredevil, even though we switched to Marvel, who, yes, has his own core concepts, but is driven by a different concept and isn't necessarily concerned with, in this example, feeling as larger than life. He's okay with being a reality. Same with someone like Moon Knight. He's the one that he wants people to see him coming. So, if you decide that Batman is about obsession, you know that you have to challenge his mastery and how much energy he puts into a given part of his lore by subverting that and proving it wrong, which sends him into a panic. And then, of course, he overcomes because Batman is largely about a normal, or a variation of a normal man overcoming things, a normal person overcoming things. Now, keep in mind, if you think Batman is about justice, some of these things might not be as important to him. He's less worried about his myth, he's less worried about always being right, and he's more worried about the end results. Can justice be served? So maybe the Court of Owls to a justice cord Batman would still be intimidating, but it wouldn't necessarily be resonant in the same way, because he doesn't necessarily care when someone appears that there's someone bigger than him, other than they need to be stopped and justice needs to be served. And so he reacts to the same villain in a different way, depending on what you've decided his core trait is. Think about Wonder Woman. If you're someone, for me, I've always tried to embrace the contradictions, and I think a lot of people do, but there are folks who say, is she a warrior first? Is she a peacemaker first? It's an even better example in some ways, because her approach to a given scenario is going to be vastly different, whether you think she's a warrior, whether you think she's a peacemaker. And of course, she's a little bit of both often. But you still have to decide, when you keep whittling it down, what's right in that core, because then that is your lens through which you can find story and you can find conflict and you can challenge these characters.